All right, hello everyone. Today for me is it's the beginning of March, so I'm having a great time. Spring is in the air. Today we are going to talk about Chapter 6 for Communication Research, and we're going to go over two main issues here. The first is how's the university structured? So a lot of students come into a university and they know they take classes, but there's a lot of other behind the scenes things that go on as far as research is concerned. We're going to talk about that. All right. And the second thing we're going to talk about is research ethics. Specifically, we're going to get into a little bit of what's known as the IRB process, and how to conduct research in an ethical way, how to make sure you go through the proper procedures so that you're not harming any subjects or participants when you carry out the research. So those are the two main things we're going to talk about. Yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, so your textbook starts off with this quote in chapter 6, right? So it says, most students probably don't fully understand the university system. Even though they are embedded in it virtually every day for 4 or more years, they think that professors are hired only to teach courses. That may be true of some schools, but for many, if not most, that's not the case. Professors are hired with the expectation that they will engage in three major activities: teaching, research, and service. All right. These are things that have been drilled into my head since I began graduate school way back in 2007, I believe. All right. But these are the three areas that I'm constantly going to my boss and saying, here's how I am, upholding, the community here, at Penn State Brandywine, for instance. This is the way that I'm participating on campus. They obviously know the classes that I teach, right? But as far as the research and the service, that's more, that's less micromanaged. That's more behind the scenes. That's stuff that I need to do on my own time. And so I just have to constantly show them, the ways that I'm engaging in research and service. Okay, so this is what it might look like for students, especially if you're an undergrad. You come to class every day, you go home, and you think that might be the end of what your professors do. So teaching, let's start with the first one. Most university professors teach between 1 and 4 classes a semester. Each class is only 3 credits. Most classes are only 3 credits, which means 3 hours a week that you're in that class. So for me, I teach on the higher end of this. So I'm a fixed term teaching line faculty. So I teach 4 classes a semester. My primary objective is teaching. If you're at a big research institution and you're sort of going for tenure, a professor might, I see most professors teach at least 2 classes a semester. The professors that only teach 1 class in the semester are the professors that are like well seasoned. They're the professors you're going to see giving commentary on CNN about the newest discoveries or whatever. They're sort of like these public intellectuals. But even for me, I'm teaching on the higher end of 4 classes. 4 times 3 hours per class, it's only 12. Right? So I'm only in the classroom 12 hours a week. If you double that for things like prep and grading, let's be generous, say between 24 and 30 hours a week I'm engaged in teaching. I still have lots of other hours in the week where it's like you need to do something if you're going to work a full 40-hour-a-week job. Imagine if a professor's only teaching 2 classes, 2 times 3 is 6 hours in the classroom total. They might engage in 12 to 15 hours of class time when you think about grading and prepping outside of the classroom. So you sit there and you're like, what do professors do all day? Here's what they do. All right. So there's the teaching component. All right. That's what most people see. Then there's the research component. So your textbooks, these are things that are written by professors. So they create these, right? This is part of their job, is to write these things. You all write papers for class. I usually I try to keep myself on write 1 paper per semester, so I can stay up with research. The research requirements for me on a teaching line are not as rigorous as maybe someone going for a tenure position, but I still need to do some research. So I aim for 1 paper fall semester, 1 paper spring semester, and 1 paper in the summer, and then try to get them published in various outlets or go to conferences and what have you. So the research could be, you go to a conference, you present conference papers, or you're just going to conferences and you're learning about other people's papers, so you're staying up to date with the newest findings in the field. You publish your scholarship, and we've talked about APA format plenty. So you publish your scholarship. You can publish an entire book on your own. You could publish a book chapter within a longer edited book. So maybe you write a 20-page chapter in a book that ends up being 300 pages, right? Or you write a journal article. Journal articles are sort of seen as like the top shelf way to publish as an academic. So yeah, they're considered, the best of the best, the people who are getting these like very well-known journals. All right, so there you have it. All right, so that's research. And then finally, service. Service is all the behind the scenes, advising students club. You sit on committees. I'm usually on 2 or 3 committees a semester. So things like the assessment committee, the advising committees. I do a lot of stuff with global programs. So when it comes to, where are we going to take students next year? You travel abroad. Let's get all the logistics set so that students, have transportation and they have museums to go to and like their money's paid on time. Like all that little behind the scenes stuff to make sure that the university functions administratively. Professors also sit on these types of committees. If there's any sort of small on-campus conferences, right, that students participate in. You as a student might want to present your research. On Penn State Brandywine's campus, we have this thing called Eureka, which undergraduates do research and then they put together a little day symposium, poster presentations. They present their research. Faculty members are behind the scenes, like helping students out to make sure that they get their research in order so they can present at these things, all right? So those are the 3 areas that professors are always engaging in. And as you see, it's a lot more stuff than just, go teach your class and go home. All right, let's talk a little bit about tenure. We've probably heard about tenure before. Let's just kind of run through the pros and cons. Usually if you're in my class, I'd ask you for some feedback on this. Students have some great examples for pros and cons, but I'll kind of run through the main ones here. Tenure ends up being, it's a lifetime appointment. And I do want to mention it's withstanding something egregious. So there's a faculty handbook that says, professors are not allowed to do these types of things. Things are unethical, for instance. If a professor, I've seen professors lose, I don't know them personally, but, like a New York Times story, like some important professor, loses his tenure, loses his entire job because the last 5 papers he wrote were all plagiarized or fabricated, or he just made up a bunch of research to sort of get notoriety, and he just made it all up. So that's a good way to lose your tenure, right? If you ended up getting tenure based on false research in the first place. Usually how tenure works is a person will get hired and then they have about a 5 to 6 year trial period. Now I'm not tenure track, so this does not apply to me, right? I'm teaching track, which means just every couple years they just renew my contract for another couple of years. But if you get hired for a tenure track line, they usually say you have about a 5 or 6 years trial window, right? And in that trial time, you need to obviously teach your classes, but you need to show the university that you are actively engaged in research. So tenure is really like it hits on research hard. Like you should be publishing in your field, you should be writing, you should be engaged in the sort of the academic, ins and outs as far as conferences and all this other kind of stuff, right? And for 5 or 6 years, you do a lot of reading and research and writing and everything else. And then if you've produced enough research, if you have good student evaluations, if you are actively engaged in service on your campus, people know who you are on campus, excuse me, after 5 or 6 years, they will grant you what's called tenure. And then you have a lifetime appointment. Withstanding something egregious. Or, some people move away and they say, okay, I got tenure at this school, and I want to use that tenure to leverage my ability to get to, maybe they want to move back closer to home, or maybe they're trying to move up to get to a more prestigious university. So you can leverage your tenure if you get it at a smaller school in order to, if you feel like moving up in the world to a more prestigious place. All right. So that's how tenure works. Again, it's usually about a 5 or 6 year trial time, and then they say you get promoted or not. Now there are pros and cons of tenure. Let's start with the pros, right? Because this is the reason tenure existed in the first place. Tenure started to exist in the first place because if you go way back into the early 20th century, a lot of professors were getting fired at the height of what was known as the Red Scare, all right? So if I was a faculty member and I was teaching things about communism, for instance, or let's say that I was openly politically communist or sympathetic to the Soviet Union and the Russians, people would say you're going to get fired, right? And there's a lot of academics who said, hold on a second, these are ideas, right? We're debating political ideologies, essentially. We should be able to ask robust questions about political ideologies, debate them in the classroom, and then see what the best idea is, right? That's the purpose of an academic institution, is to take competing ideas, put them in a classroom. It should for lack of a better term, it should be a safe space for not getting fired just because you throw out an idea, even if that idea is controversial. So people were getting fired and losing their jobs because they were talking about ideas in the classroom that people found seditious. There were some instances of, let's say, like economics professors who were not political. They were just saying, hey, I'm an economics professor and I'm going to sort of just teach you this is what the capitalist system is. We're not going to say it's good or bad, just like this is capitalism, this is socialism, this is communism, right? This is, I don't know, go back in the Middle Ages, like this is what it means to be a serf, right? Fiefdom, this kind of things. Like they were just sort of talking about different economic structures with regard to nation states. And there are economics professors getting in trouble simply for defining what a communist world would look like, right? So people are saying, like, you can't do that. You can't fire people because they are teaching ideas, right? And again, even if, like, some professors might come out and be very openly political about their ideas, they might say, like, here's an idea and I really, really like it. There's plenty of professors who just say, like, here's an idea. I'm not going to tell you if I like it or not. You can guess if I like it or not. I'm not going to tell you if I like it or not, but just like, here's an idea. Let's play around with it a little bit in the classroom. All right. Now, what are the obvious cons of tenure? All right. So this is stuff that's come up in the last like 30 years, probably longer, but since I've been around in academia, definitely the last 30 years. All right. The cons are like sometimes once people get a lifetime appointment after 5 or 6 years of hard work, then they just stop doing research and stop publishing. And we have to be truthful about this. I think as professors, I know plenty of professors. I've had plenty of professors who ended up getting tenure in the mid 90s, and then once they got tenure, they were like, "Okay, I'm all done. I'm done researching." They'll continue to teach their classes, and they get solid reviews from the students. Right? They haven't done anything egregious. They're not plagiarizing. They're not dating students. They're not like they're just like okay, but they just stop producing academic work, and they're like, I'm not really going to go to conferences anymore. I'm not going to publish anymore. And they're allowed to, hold on to their job, and they have held on to their job for decades. So there is a con where, like, you would think like once you get promoted, that tenure should you protect you, and then you can go out and you can do even more controversial work, and you can produce more things. Some people take it as an opportunity to say, hey, I got over this 5-year hump, and now for the next 25 years, I can just coast. And even though I got promoted, I'm making more money, I'm not going to produce more. So there are instances of professors who do their best work in about the first 5 or 6 years. Then they get promoted, they get job security, and they just stop doing things. So that's definitely a con of the tenure process. It's hard to fire these individuals. Some things students have brought up to me. Sometimes if a person has tenure, maybe they don't update their syllabus for like 5 to 10 years, and they're still using the same syllabus and the same examples that they were back in the 1990s, and they don't really apply to students anymore. They're not sort of like changing up their teaching methods. They just sort of say like, here's the syllabus I've been using for 20 years. I'm going to keep using it, and they're not updating it based on students' needs or like sort of like the culture of the institution anymore. So this can definitely be a drawback of tenure when people, when people use it to stay comfortable, as opposed to saying like, the purpose of tenure is to get tenure, and that means now I can go out and like explore even more controversial ideas and try to dig into them a little bit without the fear of losing my job. Okay, so this goes into the ideas of academic freedom. All right, academic freedom, long story short, it's that professors should be allowed to teach and research their subject of expertise. So professors get hired because they are expert in certain areas, and they should be able to fully explore those areas, even if those areas go into these very weird, controversial places. Now, I will say, one of the things that frustrates me about conversations on academic freedom is this idea where people assume that, for instance, if I ask a controversial question or I go down a controversial path, it means that I support that controversial conclusion, right? When that's never the case for most people who are really just interested in these debates. They say like, I'm going to ask a controversial question because I'm interested, and this is why I got involved in academia, so I can ask like really crazy questions. So just because you ask a controversial question or you put a controversial idea out there, it doesn't mean you support it. It just means like, I don't really know a lot about this, and I think the best way to get to it is to like start exploring these extreme instances, and then we kind of start scaling it back and figuring out the nuance and everything else, right? So that's, academic freedom is, look, you were hired for a specific job because of a specific expertise that you have. You should be well versed in all these areas, and sometimes you're going to start asking these like very interesting, nuanced questions that go down some controversial roads. And maybe you go down a controversial road, and then it kind of leads you back to like a more mainstream way of thinking. but you had to go down that controversial road in order to realize how wacky it was. And now you have, and that kind of leads you back to some sense of like centrism or normalcy. An example I give to some of my students is every once in a while I'll get asked to write a paper, and I might get asked to write a paper, and the editor will come to me and say, you only get 10 pages, right? In this upcoming book, it's a very short book, and every author only gets 10 pages. I might end up writing a 30-page paper. And then it's like, okay, now I got to scale it back. But I had to write that 30-page paper because I had to go all over the place in order to get a solid 10 pages of something that actually makes sense. But in order to get those 10 pages that made sense, it's like I had to go and, 20 pages just had to go all over the place and explore all these like weird ideas. And I went into some dark corners and I found some controversial research and I went all over just so I could come back succinctly and understand a solid 10 pages of something that resembles a coherent, sound, sort of like normal centrist type of argument. All right. So that's what academic freedom is all about, right? If someone has an idea or has a question, they should be allowed to explore it. There you have it. Okay. Again, it does include instances of controversy. So some of the things, I've studied, I've written some papers on race. My dissertation was on homelessness. I've written lots of things on sexual violence, sexual assault. These are all contentious issues with regard to, for lots of reasons, for obvious reasons. Yeah, but in order to sort of get at the heart of it, it's like sometimes you have to ask the question that no one else will ask. And again, it doesn't mean that you're looking for an answer or that the answer you have in mind is correct. It just means, there's a nuance here that we're not fully exploring, and I need to ask a controversial question in an interesting way in order for us to, as a community studying this topic, to really sort of put our finger on it. All right. This could be taken up as like playing the devil's advocate. When you're in an echo chamber of everybody saying the same thing, it's like you might need to be that one guy or girl who raises their hand and says, look, I have this really weird question that I need to ask because I think that we're all just participating in groupthink, and to sort of shake things up and shake us out of our complacency. I need to ask a controversial question to kind of get us back to the nuances of this debate. So I've taken controversial positions on various things. These are all published papers that I have, so you can look them up if you want. The Trayvon Martin, the killing of Trayvon Martin, I wrote a paper on that a few years back that took positions that people didn't like. Fine. The Duke Lacrosse sexual assault case from the early 2000s, I wrote a journal article on that, Women's Studies in Communication, if you want to look it up. Took some controversial positions in that. Fine. And then, welfare, which was somewhat out of my work, my dissertation work on homelessness. I took some, various controversial positions on that. But again, this is all in an effort to try to like get at the heart of like fixing these problems. And sometimes you got to ask some questions that nobody else will ask. All right, tenure and academic freedom is rooted again in some elements of the Red Scare, which we talked about. All right, so down here, why should professors be allowed to take well-reasoned yet controversial positions on controversial subjects? And part of it is like, if the entire culture is participating in groupthink, it's like everybody's kind of going down the same road of a conclusion, and the problem's still not being solved. Sometimes you need to have that one person who's willing to raise his hand and say, look, here's a controversial, let's say, race and police brutality. Here's a controversial issue, and everybody's thinking the same thing about it and coming to the same conclusions about it, and it's still not solved. Can we look at this in a different way, please? I have a different, like maybe it's something else. Can we look at a different variable for a second? Public education might be one of these things. So there's disparities between, grade performance for kids in different areas of the country, of different socioeconomic backgrounds, different racial backgrounds. There's gender disparities in education, all this other kind of stuff, right? And if everybody's just kind of participating in groupthink and saying like, for instance, like the problem is money. We just need more money in schools. Every once in a while, someone needs to raise their hand and be like, could it be something else? Maybe it's not money. Can we look at other factors involved? The politics of the state, the political policies, are there school lunch programs that we need to, institute? Do we need to have year-round schooling? Can we talk about like what's the parental situation at home, two-parent household, single-parent household? Talk about the neighborhood. Like, are there other things that go into these schools besides just like more money or less money? All right. All right, other controversial subjects: affirmative action, abortion, obviously, gun rights, sexuality, gender. Questions on gender. So, Lady Gaga has this like "Born This Way" song, and then people should be, like, are people born that way? Maybe they're born that way, maybe not. Like, is it a combination of like heritable factors? Is it a combination of like social influences with regard to people's sexuality as well as gender identity issues, right? And again, if you want to get to the heart of these types of problems in order to create sound policy that's actually going to make a difference in people's lives, you have to make sure that you're properly addressing the problem. And if you're not properly addressing the problem, then you're going to end up reaching a conclusion that you're going to implement. You're going to implement that new policy based on your conclusion, and the problem's not going to get fixed. So that's where I always come from when people question, why is it that I want to ask controversial questions? Because like I want to make sure that we're actually fixing the problem that we are purporting to fix. And if we're asking the wrong questions, or if we're laying out data that is not factual, we're not going to solve the problem, right? So education disparities, right? There's education disparities with regard to racial demographics in the United States, specifically in the college level, right? It's like, I want to solve that problem, right? I don't want there to be this huge gap between various racial groups, right? I don't want there to only be a 55% graduation rate for all students. It's like, I want to solve the graduation problem where every student who ends up going to college has the opportunity to succeed and graduate if they choose to like go on for 4 years, right? So we got to make sure we properly diagnose the problem. So there's lots of different theories out there, right, to study and explore. Gun violence. It's like at the end of the day, it's like I want fewer people dead at the end of a gun. Like I don't want gun violence to happen at all. Let's make sure that we're properly, looking at this issue on all sides of the issue. So there's some people. John Lott is a pretty well-known person who advocates for increased sort of like gun ownership. He's sort of like I almost said poster child, but that sounds a little bit disparaging. I'll try to refrain. But he is sort of like propped up a lot by people who support the NRA, for instance, because a lot of his research points to things like when there are less gun laws. So he does, it's kind of like a lot of like, if you live in Wyoming, it's like everybody has a gun and there's hardly any gun violence, right? You live in Arizona, it's like everybody's like open carry walking around the street and there's not gun violence. So he kind of looks into, but then he's like, but if you go to Chicago has like super strict gun laws and there's like gun violence everywhere. So he sort of takes this like counterintuitive argument on the issue of guns, where he's like, let's not get rid of all the guns. He's like, actually places that have lots of guns where everybody can own a gun, he's like, there's really not that much crime. So that's something of interest that we should be looking at if we actually want to solve the problem. Now, I don't know if his conclusions are going to work or not, but it's something that should be in the debate. All right, let's keep on moving along. Okay, grant money. Now, this is obviously a point of contention. Some professors, right, I'm getting paid a salary, and part of my salary from the state of Pennsylvania, right, I'm a public school teacher, right, Penn State University. Part of my salary is because I'm supposed to be conducting research. However, there are some professors who do these big grants, right? Who need lots of money to do bigger research projects. They go to outside organizations, corporations, nonprofits. They apply for grant money in order to do certain research. Now, some professors, so they get outside money to conduct research. The pro, obviously, is that they can do more research if they have more money. If I'm only limited to my salary, right, and a little bit of money that Penn State might give me for research, which is only end up being like $1,000 or $2,000 a year, I can't do a lot. But if like some big corporation comes in and says like, hey Josh, we'll give you $50,000 to do some more research, yeah, that's great. Like I can do more research on the subjects that I'm interested in. All right. The con, obviously, is that now there's this blending between public scholarship and corporate money, or money that is very interested in your conclusions, right? It's no longer disinterested. So even if it's a nonprofit, let's say, like my dissertation was on homelessness. Let's say a nonprofit organization on homelessness comes in and says, hey, Josh, we'll give you $50,000 to continue your research. It's a nonprofit organization, but there might be a little wink and a nod in that thing that says like, and if you want to keep getting this money, you better find results that we like that are going to help our sort of like political causes along the way with regard to the nonprofit work that we're doing. So even if it's not corporate tied, even if it's nonprofit tied, nonprofits, they have interest in conclusions as well. So proprietary research and scholarly research, which we talked about. Scholarly is like public research done at a university. It should be open to everybody. There's no corporate money tied to it. Proprietary is money that is through an organization. So an organization will do its own research. A corporation, a corporation will do its own research to figure out the internal workings of its organization. When proprietary research and scholarly research start to blur together, we're not really sure where these where the interests lie as far as like finding out what's actually true. The easy example of this is, back in the 70s when they were doing all this research or having all these congressional hearings in the 70s and 80s with the tobacco companies. The tobacco companies would come up and be like, we did all this research and cigarettes are healthy. And it's like, well, no crap. Like you, the cigarette company, funded the research, you paid your own scientist, and the scientists were like, if I want to keep collecting that check, I better find the results that my employer wants me to find, which is like cigarettes is healthy. Now imagine if the cigarette company comes in and they're like, okay, we'll use an epidemiologist or oncologist from a hospital. We'll go pay a doctor some money to do some research on cancer, and the doctor's like, oh, I'm a public person, I'm a public official, I'm a public researcher, I'm doing scholarly research on cancer, but this tobacco company just gave me a lot of grant money. So do I want to find results that are, true? Can I skew them a little bit? Like, what's the company want me to find, right? So anytime private money gets involved in scholarly research, results can get skewed a little bit, all right? I think there was something to kind of even this out a little bit. There was something a couple years ago where it was found that there was a big like green energy, renewable energy research that came out, and then it was found that like this big solar panel company had funded all of it, and people were like, yeah, this might be a problem, right? If somebody's doing research on climate change and all of a sudden it's like the solar panel company gave us a bunch of money, it's like, yeah, I'm probably going to find a lot of information that says climate change is going to kill us all next year, and if we don't get off fossil fuels and everybody put up solar panels, we're all going to die. People started to say like this is a conflict of interest. Climate change is something that needs to be rigorously studied and researched and solved and everything else. But we want to make sure that we are doing it in a way where there's not this sort of outside money that is influencing our results. Because again, that outside money influences our results. We might end up implementing changes that actually don't do anything good. If we actually want to solve this climate issue, we need to make sure that it's good research that is removed from various interests, because those interests, corporate interests, nonprofit interests, could skew our results, and then we're not actually solving the problem. All right, so this goes back to the last slide. It's like you should be able to ask controversial questions without being penalized, because if you actually want to solve the problem, you want to know what the true problem is, right? And the only way to get to understand the true problem is to make sure that people are protected, right? So academic freedom, this is part of tenure, like make sure people are protected from getting fired for asking controversial questions, and make sure that corporate money or nonprofit money isn't influencing your research results. All right, you should just be a researcher in a room without all this influence, without worrying that you're going to get fired, because you want to find good results. All right, because finding bad results means that you're not going to actually solve the problem. All right, we'll talk a little bit more about this in a second. All right, so this is the thing that we were going to talk about. Okay, as a researcher, you should do good research because people take your conclusions seriously. Okay, people take your conclusions seriously, so make sure that you're doing research that is uninhibited by outside influence with regard to people who have an agenda, especially if it's tied to money. All right, so scholars at the university level are conducting research that is public. So, in essence, the public pays my salary. Therefore, the public should have access to my product. Now, this gets into a lot of academic controversy with regard to paywalls. And what this means is that sometimes if I publish a journal article, it gets published by a journal, but in order for the public to access that journal, they have to pay a subscription, right? They might have to pay $50 to have access to my one article. And there's a lot of people who fight against this, and they say, look, the public already paid me to conduct the research. The public should have access to research that was conducted on the public's dimes. Now, if a private corporation does research. Let's say like the Pepsi Cola company does some internal research about their products and sugary beverages and everything else. I have no right to that, right? A private company pay their private researchers to do private inside stuff. They want to come up with conclusions, fine. I have no access to that, right? But if the public is part of my salary, again, part of my salary is for teaching, part of it is for service, part of it is for research. So if I conducted research while I am clocking hours that the public is paying for, a lot of people, including myself, say that the results of my research should be made publicly available to everybody, right? That's not how it always works right now, all right? Again, I might publish something, it's going to go to a journal, and then that journal is going to say, okay, the public can have access to it, but it's going to cost them $50 because it's behind a paywall. You're a Penn State University system student, so you have access to all these journals on the internet, but once you're not a student anymore, you're not going to be able to access the library's catalog of all those academic journals that you can currently access, right? So if your parents are not Penn State students, right, and your parents go to like pennstate.edu library and they try to download journal articles, your parents aren't going to be able to, right? So right now, Penn State pays all these journals in order to subscribe to them in order for all of their students to get access to it. But yeah, there's a lot of people who say, why are we paying money to have research public? All right, to have research that was done, to have scholarly research made public. All right. The other reason is that the public should be allowed to scrutinize our work. So the textbook lays out some numbers. These numbers are probably a little bit dated, but there's still like some there's truth to them, right? Even if they're not all the way up to date. All right. So back in the 1960s, it was found that 70% of authors, so 70% of people who produce scholarly research, did not have access to their data when they asked for it. So let's say I run a survey and I find out these results to a survey. I interview 500 people about their political affiliation. And then afterwards, someone's like, Josh, I think your research is garbage. Can you just send me your original research? And I want to comb through the numbers myself as just a general person in the public sphere, right? Like your neighbor, right? Your neighbor, not an academic, but they just want to look at the original data, not the data that you wrote up, but they just want to look at all the original numbers before you interpreted them. Back in the 60s, some people looked at this and they said like 70% of people couldn't produce their actual data. So that gets a little bit sketchy, right? It's like, did you fabricate the data? Did you take the data and just like throw it in the dumpster? And why didn't you keep the data? You should be able to produce the data long after you publish the results. In the 1970s, again, Craig and Reese found that half the people could not supply data. Back on the last slide, there was a book that was, there was a picture of this book called Mismatch Theory, which is a theory that argues against affirmative action in higher education. What Mismatch Theory says, you can look it up. It says that when students are mismatched with a university, so if you take anything into consideration besides academics, like what Mismatch Theory says is the only thing you should look at as to whether or not a student gets into college is their academic performance, because that's the only thing that matters in the classroom, right? And when you start looking at other things like race, for instance, what ends up happening is students get mismatched with universities, and then students who can't perform at a current academic level, they end up like dropping out of college, or they end up like taking a year off. They end up failing out of school, right? They go on academic probation. They just have a harder time graduating because they're actually at the wrong school with regard to what they're currently capable of. All right. Now, in a different video, I talk about this. Doesn't mean that students will never be capable of graduating from Harvard. It just means maybe you need to start off at Delaware County first, right, and work your way up. Then you have the credentials in order to transfer to, Harvard, or go to Harvard for your MBA or your medical degree or your law degree or something. All right. So, Mismatch theory, the people who are looking at this theory have been fighting with people, specifically in the state of California, to try to find affirmative action research. So there was these people in California who put together this big study that said affirmative action is really, really good for students. And it was this whole commission, and it influenced public policy. And if you follow California and affirmative action, they got rid of it for a while. They want to put it back into place. California has this big court cases going on with affirmative action and how do they allow people into the University of California school system, like who gets to go to what school based on various affirmative action policies. It's a huge deal in California. So there was a group that put together this big study that said affirmative action is good for students. And the people who look at mismatch theory said, okay, like we believe you maybe, but like, can you just show us the data? And the people who did the study said, oh, we can't really find our research. We don't really know what happened to it. But they put it all out there in court and said affirmative action is good because our data says it's good. And through these different court filings, the mismatch theory people said, okay, you say your data is good and it shows that affirmative action is good. Can you just show us the numbers? And the affirmative action people said, no, like we don't have them. We lost them. We don't know where they're at. Somebody else took them. Like my dog ate my homework. And so this gets like really sketchy, right? Now here's the thing. Affirmative action people might be 100% true, might be 100% truthful that affirmative action is good, right? And it might be that their data is sound, but it's always like this weird problem when someone says like, okay, show me your data. And you're like, I don't have it. Like it just sounds sketchy, right? And you don't want to leave people with this like bad idea in the back of their head. Like, you know, what are you trying to hide from us? All right. So again, governments, businesses, etc., they use university to make policy. So it's always important that a researcher does good research and can take all those numbers and make it publicly available so that the public can scrutinize the research. Again, my position, lots of other people's, if it's public research done at a public university by a public school professor, teacher, researcher, whatever, all of that information should be publicly available to everybody. If it's a private entity, right? No, you don't have a right to ask them for their stuff because they paid for it themselves. The taxpayer pays my salary. They should have access to everything that I produce. That's not the way it currently is, though. All right. Here's a young man. You should know his name. All right. This is just a very tragic situation, but he did a lot to bring some of this to light at a very, very young age. He died when he was 26, committed suicide. But in his very, very short time with us on Earth, he did a lot of really, really good things that brought attention to a lot of some of this corporate interest, we'll say, in public education. All right. So Aaron Schwartz, he was this computer whiz kid. He got all this grant money when he was very, very young, went to college very, very young. He started it as a fellow at Harvard when he was just 24 years old in 2010, right? So he's like already putting himself next to very important, powerful people on the world stage with regard to, you know, research and computers. And he was kind of in there like the beginning of like WikiLeaks. I can't remember if he was officially involved with them, but he's definitely kind of in with that crowd, right? As far as just like public access to everything. He was just kind of in that initial crowd when, you know, the internet was kind of up and coming. Social media was exploding, you know, WikiLeaks was exploding. He was just a big like transparency kind of person. All right, in 2011, he was arrested because he went into MIT, which is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, this huge, you know, important university, like the #1 tech university in the world, right? And he was arrested because he went in there and he connected all of their computers to an outside network. So it downloaded everything from JSTOR. Now, what JSTOR is, it's a huge hub for academic journals. All right, so you probably have seen the JSTOR watermark on some of the journal articles that you have downloaded from the Penn State Library System, right? All it is, it's a big company that says, you know, we're the ones who, if I publish a journal article, it might go through JSTOR, and then JSTOR is the one that is responsible for making my neighbor pay $50 in order to see what I published. All right, so JSTOR is the hub, that's the paywall. All right, so Aaron Schwartz, he goes in and he says, look, MIT is doing important research, but it's also doing research that influences government policy. All right, so what he wanted to do is he said, because you know, MIT is utilizing research that is influencing public policy, the public should know about this research. So he went in, he hacked the computers. This is all illegal, right? But you get into this sort of like, should it be legal or illegal kind of question, right? So it's very much illegal what he did, right? However, he connected all of the MIT JSTOR database, and he connected it to, he basically like shot it out there and said like, all this information is now public to everybody. We're not going to keep it behind this sort of like MIT firewall so that the public doesn't have access to it. So he just wanted to make all this academic research, he wanted to make it publicly available to everybody. And he was arrested for it, right? Because that research was currently at the time owned by JSTOR. Like what he was doing, he was basically like selling books on the black market, right? It's like you can't steal a book and give it to somebody. It's like an author wrote that book. You know, an author should have, you know, you can't illegally download somebody's music. It's like you should have to go to like iTunes and pay for somebody's music. He was just saying like we're just going to open it all up to everybody. Now, he was interested in open access. He was interested in stopping the paywalls, right? For scholarly publications. Again, his whole thing was like if it's scholarly publications that is influencing public policy, the public should know how this research happens. Like you should know how the sausage is made, right? Now, this is one of the most interesting parts of this whole situation. He started to run an algorithm on all of these journal articles. And what he started to find is that scholarly articles, right? So we go back to, now we're going back a few slides to this idea of like scholarly versus proprietary versus grant research. What he started to find is like there's all these scholarly articles that are supposed to be very unbiased, that are not supposed to be influenced by money, right? I'm a public school teacher. I'm not supposed to be influenced by private corporate interest. What he started to find is that scholarly research that had private corporate money, grant money behind it, he's like, he started to find these connections. He's like, you know, now this isn't a direct example, but it would be like this, right? If I'm a public researcher at a public university, what he essentially did was he would run the algorithm. He was like, wow, Josh did all this research on smoking and cancer and found that smoking doesn't cause cancer. But I also found that Josh was funded by the tobacco company, right? That's what he essentially found, but with lots of other journal articles, with lots of other corporate interests behind it, right? He would find things like, wow, here's all these papers on climate change that say, you know, the world's going to end tomorrow and we need to use solar panels instead of fossil fuels. And all of these papers are funded by the solar panel industry. Here's a bunch of papers that say sugar's not that bad for you, but they're all funded by the Pepsi-Cola company, right? That's what he was able to find as he started to get mass amounts of data. He would run it through an algorithm. He would say, which paper is funded by which corporation or which nonprofit? And isn't it interesting that the majority of these papers funded by these corporations found favorable results for the corporations, right? The sugar beverage company funded Josh, and Josh said sugary beverages aren't that bad. The tobacco company funded Josh, and Josh said smoking doesn't cause cancer, right? Like this is what he started to find, these patterns in these academic journal articles. There's a lot of pressure come down on him, and unfortunately, again, he's a young man here. And at the age of 26, he ends up committing suicide before the whole trial unfolds, right? But again, very important person, brings up a lot of important questions on how research is conducted, who funds that research. And again, this gets back to some stuff we've talked about in previous classes on things like the replication crisis. You know, research should be able to be replicated. It shouldn't just be, you know, I shouldn't be able to come up with a conclusion and say, for instance, I shouldn't be able to write a paper that says affirmative action is good, and someone else says, show me your data. And I'm like, no, I don't, like, we only get to do that research one time, and you just have to trust my results. Somebody else should be able to take my information, my data, run it through their own program and see if they find the same results, right? That's the purpose of scholarship. Here's all the data, here's all the information. Let's all look at it from different angles and see if we come up with the same results or different results. And if we come up with different results, we need to argue about that, right? But I can't just say, I did research on affirmative action. I'm going to hold all my data, and someone says, let me see that data, and I say, no, you just have to trust me. No, Aaron Schwartz was a person who was like, let's get all that data, let's throw it out into the world. Let's take all those academic articles, let's throw them out in the world. Let's take all of the money, the grant money behind these articles, let people know where the money's coming from, and then people just can be a little bit more skeptical, think a little bit more critically about how public research is actually being conducted, because again, public research, academic research influences politicians, all right, which influences our day-to-day lives, it influences public policy and the rest of it. And if you want to have good public policy, you have to have accurate data. All right, quickly here, ethics. All right, there are moral principles and recognized rules of conduct for research, right? So there are rules for conducting research. You can collect data on very controversial issues, right? Race, gender, sexuality, right? The rest of it. However, there's this standard known as minimal harm, right? You can't do harm to people, right? If there is harm, it might just be like, we're going to ask you some controversial questions. It might, make you upset a little bit, right? It might make you a little uncomfortable. If someone especially conversation about like race or sexual assault, right? But going in, people are like, okay, like people should know what they're going into. Here are some things that prompted conversations on ethics, which we'll get to the IRB on the next slide. But prior to these sorts of standards, there were lots of experiments that were just done by people without any oversight, which is terrible. All right. So first and foremost, you can go back to the experiments that the Nazis were doing on people within concentration camps. Awful, horrible, right? You can definitely read about it. Some of the things they would do is they would take a set of twins, right? So two 10-year-old twins, and they would put one over here, and they say, you get to hang out and just kind of live normally as you can in a concentration camp for a moment. Like, we're not going to do any harm to you. Like, while you're, we obviously they did harm to them already by putting them in a concentration camp, but we're going to put you somewhere. We're not going to touch you for a while. They would take a second twin and they would put him in basically the equivalent of like a torture chamber. And they wanted to see if like twins were connected, right? So they would torture this twin over here and see if the other twin reacted, even though the other twin was on the other side of the camp and didn't know what was going on to, their brother or sister, right? The Nazis did horrible things, right? We all know that. And while people were in concentration camps, it wasn't just forced labor. It was also like, while we have all these people, we might as well do a bunch of experiments on them. Terrible, right? So you can't do that anymore, thank God. All right, here's some other well-known. So there was a Willowbrook study which looked at hepatitis transmission in hospitals for mentally impaired children. So, psychiatric wards, what they used to be called. And they were like, well, all these kids, they're kind of like mentally handicapped anyways. Let's just sort of while they're here, we might as well just allow them to get, things like hepatitis or other venereal diseases, and we can run different treatments on them and nobody really cares because they're just, they're kind of unwanted, mentally unwell children, right? Awful, horrible stuff, but this kind of stuff that happened. The most famous one you probably are all familiar with is the Tuskegee Experiment, where a lot of African American men who had syphilis were then told, like, hey, take this new drug to try to, we're going to help you overcome syphilis. And it was really just a placebo. And all these doctors were like, we're going to help you cure your syphilis. But over the course of years, the doctors didn't help them. They were just basically giving them the equivalent of like sugar tablets. And then all these men just got like progressively worse. They ended up dying awful, horrible deaths because of syphilis, because doctors just lied to them. They're like, well, they already have syphilis. We don't really need to help them. Let's just kind of watch this disease and let's see how crazy it gets. And it got awful. And so you can't do that anymore. All right. So there's a couple other ones here as well. Similar type of stuff, right? Just they would take, people who were sort of on the fringes of society, marginalized, had no access to health care or mental health care. Academics, doctors would just sort of say like, well, they're already here. Let's just run experiments on them with or without their consent, even if it's going to do some sort of harm to them. All right. This is not okay. It was not okay at the time. And now, because of things like this, we instituted what's known as the Institutional Review Board. We know this as IRB. So if you hear academics say IRB, this is what they mean. All right. It's a committee at every university. Every university has an IRB panel. And what they do is they look over your research and your methods before the study can take place. So for instance, my dissertation was on homelessness. Before I could go out there and start interviewing people who were homeless, I had to submit a packet that said, here's how I'm going to find participants. Here's how I'm going to engage with participants. Here are the questions I'm going to ask them. And based on that, the IRB would say, like, is this going to do minimal harm, right? Especially when you're talking about something like homelessness, sexual assault, racial issues. these are all things that can bring up difficult conversations, right? Or different like mental, we could say, it would be some sort of, it could cause mental distress. So the IRB wants to make sure that the way in which you're asking questions or the resources available to the participants are clearly laid out in case the person is triggered or traumatized by being involved in the situation. You think, sexual assault interviews, for instance. So there's people I know who do research, extensive research on sexual assault. They go around and they interview people who have been sexually assaulted, and always on the question form somewhere, they say like, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. They're going to be awful. You're allowed to stop these questions at any time. And if you need to stop, like here's a card to a therapist or a counselor that you can call for free immediately, and that person is available like right now for you to talk to them in case some sort of mental distress happens. So these are things that the IRB lays out to make sure that like minimal harm is done. Obviously, that's more within like social scientific stuff when you're talking about, doing questions, some sort of question response. IRB also pertains to, medicine, right? As far as, like the coronavirus vaccine, it has to go through all these stages to make sure that people are properly cared for, especially in the human trial phase. All right, we want to make sure that people who are getting, who are, in some ways like acting as like human guinea pigs to take this vaccine for us before the mass population, like these people are heroes. Like they go into a doctor and say like, I don't know what this is. You don't know how it's going to react. I don't know how it's going to react. Just shove this needle in my arm and hopefully it helps out humanity. The IRB wants to make sure that these individuals know what's happening. They're fully aware of what's going to happen. And if anything goes wrong, they want to make sure that these individuals are taken care of as quickly as possible. All right. So research should have voluntary and implied consent, right? So again, obviously being the first person to take the coronavirus vaccine in its trial phase is dangerous. But they lay it out and they say like, here are the risks, and do you voluntarily do this? Like, and then implied consent means, you say yes. This is different than what happened in like the Tuskegee situation, right? Like they go around and be like, hey, all you African American men, you have syphilis. We're going to help you out. And, the guys are like, great, like help us out. They did not tell them that like some of you will get help, some of you will get a placebo. Like the reason the Tuskegee experiment was so awful is because nobody knew that they were just doing a big medical trial on them. Everyone's thought like these doctors were there to help them, right? Now there are plenty of medical experiments now where people come into the room and they say, look, y'all are sick and we got to track this disease. Half of you are going to get medicine. The other half of you are going to get a placebo. We're not going to tell you who that is. You don't have to stick around for it, but if you want to, that'd be great because it would help us out, right? These are things that happen now. Like people do get placebos, right? But they are told that they might get a placebo, and then they have voluntarily given, they are voluntarily involved and they have given consent. In this Tuskegee situation, doctors just came in and said, oh, you all have syphilis. We're going to help you. And nobody knew that, a lot of them were not going to get helped at all. Right? So it was not voluntary participation in some sort of tracking of syphilis. It was awful and horrible and not good. All right. Okay. So people cannot be coerced into participating. People have to affirm saying yes by signing some sort of waiver. Now here's the thing with IRB. You do not need to get IRB because if you are just observing people in public spaces, right? So if you're doing some sort of ethnographic research, you can, right? Like you can observe people in public spaces and you can look at them like indirectly without IRB approval. But if you engage with people, then you need IRB approval. So I can sit out in a park, and if I'm doing some sort of study on like, I don't know, urban landscape and like park usage, right? I can go out there and I can just like hang out in the park. And I don't have to get any approval. But if I start going around and asking people questions, you should probably get some sort of IRB, situation. If there are informal engagements, you're probably good. Like regular strangers talking to each other in the park, that's probably fine. But as soon as you start asking like very direct questions and stuff, you're gonna need IRB approval, all right? But if it's sort of public areas, you're good to go. Okay, and finally, you need to know the difference. This is on the test. Anonymity and confidentiality, they are different. Anonymity, the researcher cannot determine what the participant said. So how does this work? If I get a room full of 500 participants and I hand them all a sheet of paper and just say, take this survey, give it to me as you leave, and then you leave, I have no idea who filled out what piece of paper. There's 500 people. They all gave it. They don't put their name on it. They don't put any sort of recognizable number on it. They don't say I'm participant number 1, right? They just take the survey, they turn it back in, and they go about their day. All right. Anonymity. The researcher doesn't know. The researcher cannot figure out who did what survey. All right. Confidentiality is that the researcher knows who said what, but they have to sign. But the researcher signs a confidentiality thing that says, I'm never going to tell. I can't tell anybody. So how this might work is, I could do a one-on-one interview with you, and then afterwards, I give you a pseudonym. This is what I did for my dissertation. I interviewed a bunch of people who were homeless, and then once it was done, obviously I knew their real name, but I gave them pseudonyms in my write-up of my dissertation and now in my book, right? So everybody got fake names, right? The other way this could work is, let's say you do need to do a pre-test, post-test. So I do need someone to fill out a survey twice, maybe a month apart. So the first time they fill out the test, they don't put their name on the test. What they do is I say, like, you're participant 258, and they put 258 on the paper. And then when they come back, they say, hi, my name's Josh. And I look it up and it's like, Josh, oh, you're 258. Here's the second survey for 258. Now I can look at 258. I know that 258 means Josh, but when I write up my results, I just say, like, out of 500 participants, participant 258 said the following things. I know who 258 is because I need to track the progress of participant 258, but their name is removed from all information. All right. Okay. Anonymity, confidentiality, know the difference. That was a lot. I hope you got something out of it. Important stuff, though. All right. Do good research, ask controversial questions, protect other people's rights to ask controversial questions, and make sure that you do minimal amount of harm anytime you engage in research activities. Okay. I will see you next time.